welcome back to my channel. And if you are new, then welcome. I'm JackieKennedy and I hope to earn your subscription today. Well, today we have a great lineup of vintage magazines and books that we're gonna look through. And so I'm really excited about doing that with you. The first thing I wanna say though is we have Mansfield Park going this week. And even if you think Jane Austen isn't your cup of tea, this book is really interesting. It deals with a poor young lady named Fanny Price, and she has two aunts who basically have attached themselves to a very wealthy man. One of them is married to him, and then one of them is kind of a widow that lives on his property. And so she goes to live at this home, at this great estate with some cousins. And so she's sort of an outsider observing from the inside. And it's very fascinating. A look at class, a look at different people and how that was glossed over because of their wealth, but then also gives her keen insights into different social things going on. Anyway, it's a wonderful book. So if you're at all interested, I just thought since it's Thanksgiving week and we all have tasks we're going to be doing all week, that some of you might like to listen through a novel. And so that's going to be coming over the next week or so. So if that's at all interesting to you, take a look. There's a whole playlist. The second thing I have just to ask you very fast is, once we get through the Mansfield Park book, I hope to choose our next book that's going to be more of hopefully an uplifting and engaging type book that we can just kind of move through in a story fashion and enjoy discussing together. Right now, of course, we're going through our book Chappaquiddick. I think I left it over there, but we have our book Chappaquiddick that's much more investigative, and each time we end a chapter, we make observations, and it's all very intellectually rigorous. But we love our stories where we can just listen and get a bit of interesting things from the world or from someone's life. And so I have two options, and I just want to get your way in. If you would just comment, you can just vote one word or the other word based on which one you would prefer. But I have two options that I keep going back and forth with. Both of them I have read the first little bit, and both seem really interesting. And so I really want your input. One would be Palace Papers, which we've talked about before. This is Tina Brown's book. It is thick, but as I read through it, I just thought this is so full of so many interesting, meaty, insightful, memorable, newsworthy things that have happened. This takes us basically from right after Diana's passing all the way up to what's called Megxit, where Meghan and Harry left. And so it's got all of these women in it, and it is very well sourced, very well an insider's view of what happened in the British monarchy from post Diana to the time of Harry and Meghan. Really interesting time period, very fascinating. I'm interested in this, and I would love to walk through it with you, whether now or in the future. But that's option one. Option two is Julia Andrews' book, y'all. And I just thought, oh, it's so interesting. This is her life in Hollywood. So she has an earlier one that I do have, but I actually narrowed it down to this one. This has a very little bit at the beginning that walks us through her childhood and years of training that got her up to Hollywood, but it really starts out with her in her Hollywood movie years. And so anyway, I thought this could also be fascinating. So this is option two or option one. You guys let me know which one you would prefer, whether it's Palace Papers or Homework by Julia Andrews. So that's all. Just comment with that in the comments, and I will love to hear your feedback, because I actually am like flipping through both, interested in both. So let's see. All right. The first vintage magazine that I have to bring to you is actually from this year, but so it's the People magazine Oprah, but it's a story that tells us about her childhood. And I knew a little bit of this, but I just thought it'd be really fun to read together. So this is called Country Girl, and look at this little darling picture of tiny Oprah. So cute. Okay, so let's just read this together. Born into Mississippi poverty, Oprah Winfrey rose above racism, abuse, and family dysfunction to get out and put herself on a path that no Black woman had walked before. This is her at age 3 that we just looked at, and this is her at age 6 with some little cool sunglasses on. Really cute. It says, Oprah Winfrey thought she had landed on an alien planet. It was 1960, and 6-year-old Oprah, who at that point had been raised by her grandmother in rural Coshocou, Mississippi, had just arrived in urban Milwaukee, where she would now live with her mother, Vernita Lee, who worked as a maid cleaning houses. The new neighborhood was noisy and crowded. The boarding house where her mother lived was unwelcome and claustrophobic. This was a startling change from the quiet life she had known on her grandma Hattie Mae's 3-acre hog farm. Oprah had loved talking to the pigs and chickens and sharing the warmth of her maternal grandmother's bed. On her first night in Milwaukee, Winfrey would recall years later, she was made to sleep on the porch by the boarding house owner. Oprah was confused but suspected that the woman was offended by her darker complexion. She was especially disheartened that Vernita did not fight for her. That first night, I got on my knees and prayed to God to send angels to protect me, Oprah wrote in her 2021 book, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. When I woke in the morning, the terror was gone, but the sense of being unsafe while sleeping would remain for much of my life. A knowing had filled my soul. At 6 years old, I felt I was alone, and no one but God was going to watch out for me. She was born Oprah Gail Winfrey on January 29, 1954, to unwed teen parents who broke up soon after her arrival. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, was serving in the military when Vernita left the Jim Crow South to seek better job opportunities, leaving Oprah to live with her own mother. At age 3, Oprah was taught how to read by Hattie Mae, sparking a lifetime obsession with books. By 5, she had already learned to write. A gifted student, Oprah had jumped from 1st to 3rd grade. When Hattie Mae received visitors on the farm, the loquacious child would recite complete Bible verses at home and in church, earning Oprah the nickname, the Preacher. Yet, there were dark times. Winfrey would later tell of helplessly watching as her grandfather assaulted her grandmother, who could herself be an abusive disciplinarian. She often used a switch to punish Oprah, once whipping her so badly that the welts on her back bled through her Sunday dress. Like a lot of Black parents during that era, this is a quote from her, the idea of hugging and loving on your child or even allowing the child to feel seen was just not a part of her life, she told today's Hoda Khattab in 2021, adding, but she did give me Jesus. She did give me a belief in something bigger than myself, so I am grateful for that. When Hattie Mae became ill, Oprah was sent to live with her mother. Vernita's long hours as a domestic worker often kept her away from the kids, which now included half-brother Jeffrey and half-sister Patricia. Her mother did not know what to make of her studious oldest daughter. Oprah loved the library, but Vernita refused to take her and disparaged her as a bookworm. There would, however, be a brief reprieve. In 1962, financial struggles forced Vernita to send Oprah to stay with her father, Vernon, a barber, and his wife, Zelma, in Tennessee. Unable to have children, the ecstatic couple showed an overabundance of love and attention on Oprah. Whew, what a difference to go through those 3 different homes. Vernon believed that a disciplined structure and a premium on education and church would give his daughter the best chance. Oprah was only allowed to watch television 1 hour a day. In addition to Oprah's weekly school assignments, Zelma required her to choose 5 books from the library and write 5 book reports. That's great. Vernon and Zelma instantly picked up on the 12-year-old's natural gift for public speaking. At one event, Oprah made $500 for a speech she delivered at a Nashville church. That's amazing at that time and place. $500 was a lot of money back then. That was a lot of money when I was a kid in the 80s. So at this time in the 60s, that would have been a fantastic amount of money. She saw her future. Oprah confidently told her father that she would not only be famous, she would be paid to talk. And we will stop it there. But we may come back to this. Y'all let me know if you enjoy this Oprah section. But I just thought, she's such a famous woman, such an interesting woman. And I wanted to hear more about her life. So it says, there's the church that says Oprah faced her first audience here. And then there's her father, the barber shop. So that's our first article. Our second one, we are going to revisit this book that we are walking through. It's The Prince and Princess of Wales. It was participated with by the two of them, and this is during the happy period before things started going awry. So we're just kind of enjoying these moments when things were beautiful and lovely in their lives and remembering what their childhood was like of William and Harry. So this page is just a photo spread of all different things with a photographer coming in to try to get photos of the boys. So we see there's William with the photographer and Diana trying to kind of coach him where he should be. We have photos there, so adorable, of them. It says this is him trying to help her and put makeup on. How funny. And then here he's making a cute little face for the photographer. Very adorable in there. And you might know, but this is part of probably what contributed to Princess Catherine learning to be a photographer, because she does the photography for their children. And, you know, that's even spawned some controversy this last year. But that's what she's chosen to do to kind of avoid this whole rigmarole in their home. Instead, she takes the photographs and uploads them for the media's use. It says the parents are enjoying the experience of both boys doing new things each day. And there are differences that a mother's eye can spot. William's a typical 3-year-old because I worked with 3-year-olds. Yeah, she had worked in a nursery school before marrying Prince Charles. Very enthusiastic about things, pushes himself right into it. He's not at all shy, but very polite, extraordinarily enough. Where perhaps Harry is quieter and just watches. Whether he copies William, we'll wait and see, but he's certainly a different character altogether. But not entirely different. The two of them hammering at a piano produces a discordance with which they are jointly very happy. So there they are doing that. Sounds like Stockhausen, their father says. The princess still plays the piano herself. I fiddle around. It's nothing to get excited about, but it's marvelous. It's very therapeutic. Her sons plainly find it a therapy or something, too. The outside world expects to see a royal family in a normally happy family life. It also expects to see the royal partnership on view, as it did with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, and as it does now with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. But family life is not always what the partnership of the prince and princess can organize for itself. The calls on them do not always call for both of them, and in the modern world they see some advantages in that. How do they go about it? The prince is candid. It's not exactly coordinated in advance. He says, well, rather probably more haphazardly than people would think. We tend to have 2 program meetings a year, which means that you have to plan your life 6 months or more ahead, which is murder. But, I mean, you decide if you want to come on a particular thing with me. There will obviously be occasions when, you know, we do things separately. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think everybody should do everything together all the time. The magazine asks, so does the princess put her foot down and say what she wants to go to and what not? Not quite. It seems there's some protocol to be observed. Well, that's a naughty question. No, if I'm asked if the invitation comes in, would they both like to come? Obviously, I'll try. But sometimes I'm not required. If it's what I call a boys' day and they don't want me, I'll go somewhere else. So that's how they negotiated schedule arrangements. It's interesting the way that the British monarchs, especially George and Elizabeth, which was Queen Elizabeth's parents, they did things all together. But that partly is because their girls were older by the time he ascended to the throne. Those girls were more like, I believe, late elementary age when he ascended to the throne. And so they were able to get on more by themselves and probably do just fine with nannies, whereas younger children would need their parents. And of course, Queen Elizabeth, her parenting was something very different. In fact, I have an article about that very thing that we'll read together sometime. But, you know, that was its own discussed and debated topic. So what Princess Di did with the boys was something rather different, where she didn't go to everything with Charles. And she was a wonderful mother, at least during the little years. She seemed quite devoted, quite committed to their care. So our next magazine we have already looked at once. In our last one, we read this article together. But when I went back through this magazine, I always like to peek back through and just make sure we didn't miss something. And I found, first of all, this advertisement that I just thought was fun. We needed to look at together. You guys know I like this, but this is Friends. This is the Friends cast, all as if they're being arrested in New York. They've got their police photos and it says, who's gonna drink the Diet Coke? And so there was some sort of contest where you were supposed to collect all 6 names. But I just thought that was funny because that was all the rage back then. This one is one of these little pages that walks through, like, you know, Hollywood gossip, different things. But something interesting, it says, by most accounts, the launch of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s new bi-monthly political magazine, George. So it's all about this right here. And you can see Cindy Crawford there on the cover. It says, has been a success. The first issue, which came out in September with Cindy Crawford on the cover, sold 90% of its 500,000 print run. No sales figures are yet available for the second issue, which hit stands in November with Robert De Niro on the cover. But many media analysts aren't convinced that the momentum can be maintained over the long haul. Keith J. Kelly, who covers industry for Advertising Age, commented, the magazine started phenomenally, perhaps too phenomenally, because it's going to be hard to sustain. While there's a big rush around a magazine's launch, there's always a little bit of fall off after it gets started. The folks at George are really going to face the tough challenges of publishing after the election in 1997. That's when people will be used to the idea that George is being edited by JFK Jr. and there will be no national election to lure the casual political aficionado. So that is just their little summary, which is fascinating because if you remember from our reading of Ask Not, that is exactly what happened with the magazine. It did really phenomenally in the beginning, and then it just started to really tank and not do well, and you know, had its problems. So anyway, that's that article that I wanted to read with you guys. And then the next article that I wanted to share with you guys, which is in this same magazine, which is hard to believe that it contained this many things. And I still have 2 other articles that we'll read in another edition. But this one is, it says, hoping fans will bid a lot for Camelot, Sotheby's will auction the former First Lady's belongings. It says, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis had the kind of class that money can't buy. But for a few $100, you might be able to pick up, say, her monogrammed sterling silver Tiffany tape measure. Have a few more shekels to spare? Can we interest you in a 40-carat diamond that was a present from her second husband, Aristotle Onassis? Those and some 4,000 other items from Jackie's Fifth Avenue apartment will be gone when Sotheby's launches a 4-day auction at its New York City galleries on April 23rd. This was 1996. Proceeds, which the auctioneers estimate at more than $5 million, will go to pay estate taxes. Although the sale includes only things that the former First Lady's children, Carolyn, 38, and JFK Jr., 35, decided not to donate to the JFK Library Foundation or keep for themselves, the array is far from lackluster. Among the available items, one of President Kennedy's famous rocking chairs, his leather hat box, the 18th century desk he used to sign the 1963 nuclear test ban treaty. But it is Jacqueline Kennedy's personal possessions that may be the most intriguing. There's a childhood textbook on the conjugation of French verbs, necklaces and baubles aplenty, 3 used saddles, and more than 3,000 books on various subjects and signed by notables. And of course, there's one more thing. Given anticipated demand, admission to both the auction and exhibition will require a catalog purchase. Those were $45 and $90 for the hardbound, and the profits for that would go to the Kennedy Library. So very interesting. The tickets were limited to 30,000 tickets, and that's all really interesting. So it shows just different jewels, pearls, necklaces, photos, gifts. Oh my word, a 40-carat diamond here. Just stunning. So now we're going to read from Forgive My Grief by Penn Jones Jr. This is all about his critique of the Warren Commission after the Kennedy assassination. And this one is number 4, Julia Anne Mercer, Deposition. Last week, we printed the record on Seth Cantor and how the Warren Commission arrived at the conclusion that Cantor was mistaken and that he did not see Ruby at Parkland Hospital. I'll just, in case you don't know the context for this, let me explain. Seth Cantor was a reporter who worked Dallas for a long time. He's actually written a book about Jack Ruby that I have back here in my stack. But he knew Jack Ruby very well. They had worked alongside each other and knew him on site. They were conversant with one another, knew each other by first name basis. Seth Cantor was at Parkland Hospital when JFK was in the operating room, in the emergency room. And he saw Jack Ruby and they had a little conversation there. Well, when he reported about that, he was denied that because Jack Ruby, according to his own testimony, was somewhere else. And so they concluded that Seth Cantor, the reporter, who had no reason to lie about these things, was just mistaken, rather than that there was some error on Jack Ruby's part that he had actually been at Parkland Hospital. It says this, even though Cantor had worked in Dallas 2 years and Ruby was in frequent contact with Cantor. This isn't something you would accidentally, one of the most important, most consequential moments of your life, to actually be at the hospital where the slain president was being worked on in real time. You would recall those conversations with great clarity, I think. But anyway, so Ruby denied it. Cantor said that he saw him there. Soon we will show the second of 4 witnesses considered to be mistaken or lying by either the commission or another witness. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig testified that he saw a suspicious character running from the clump of trees to a waiting car shortly after the fatal shots were fired. So, a deputy sheriff said he saw a suspicious character running from the clump of trees. That would be up on the grassy knoll, to a waiting car. Captain Will Fritz said Craig's testimony was not true. This week, however, we print the deposition of a witness who saw a suspicious character with a rifle case going toward the clump of trees near the railroad overpass. Her words back up strongly the testimony of Craig. The deposition of Julia Anne Mercer was devastating, but she was not called as a witness and her name is not found in any index. Were her words so lethal to the Warren Commission's theory of no conspiracy? Her words are simply listed in Volume 19 under the heading Dallas County Sheriff Office Record of the Events Surrounding the Assassination. Here is what the lady said. On November 22nd, 1963, I was driving a rented white Valiant automobile west on Elm Street and was proceeding to the overpass in a westerly direction. And at a point about 45 or 50 feet east of the overhead signs of the right entrance road to the overpass, there was a truck parked on the right-hand side of the road. The truck looked like it had 1 or 2 wheels up on the curb. The hood of the truck was open. On the driver's side of the truck, there were printed letters in black oval shaped, which said, air conditioning. This was a pickup truck, and along the back side of the truck were what appeared to be toolboxes. The truck was a green Ford with a Texas license. I remember seeing the word Ford at the back of the truck. A man was sitting under the wheel of the car and slouched over the wheel. This man had on a green jacket, was a white male in about his 40s, and was heavy set. I did not see him too clearly. Another man was at the back of the truck and reached over the tailgate and took out from the truck what appeared to be a gun case. This case was about 8 inches wide at its widest spot and tapered down to a width of 4 or 5 inches. The man who took this out of the truck then proceeded to walk away from the truck, and as he did, the small end of the case caught in the grass or sidewalk, and he reached down to free it. He then proceeded to walk up across the grass and up the grassy hill which forms part of the overpass. This is the last I saw of this man. I had been delayed because the truck, which I described above, was blocking my passage, and I had to wait until the lane to my left cleared so I could go by the truck. During the time I was at this point and observed the above incident, there were 3 policemen standing, talking, near a motorcycle on the bridge just west of me. The man who took what appeared to be the gun case out of his truck was a white male who appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s, and he was wearing a gray jacket, brown pants, and a plaid shirt as best I can remember. I remember he had on some kind of hat that looked like a wool stocking hat with a tassel in the middle of it. I believe that I can identify this man if I see him again. The man who remained in the truck had light brown hair, and I believe I could identify him also were I to see him again. Signed, Julia Anne Mercer, notarized by Rosemary Allen. Now, it's about to give a little summary at the end, but what I want to say is this woman had no reason to make up something like this, and particularly there are some things that I see in the statement that make it even more likely to be true. One is that she gives this detail about the bottom end of the case catching in the grass. That's kind of a particular random detail that someone doesn't just think up to make up. Like if you're just making up the story, you're like, he hurried up the hill as fast as he could and looked around, to make sure nobody had seen him or something like that. She doesn't say that. She says his case caught in the grass and he had to reach down to free it. That's a very particular detail that has an air of truthfulness about it. The other thing is that she appeals to the case that there were 3 policemen standing on the bridge. So the fact that there were these men standing there probably made her feel that these men weren't doing anything wrong, but also is something that if you had made something up, you would not say this was true, because it would inherently, they could go talk to the 3 men who were there and say, well, was she actually right? And was there a truck there at that time? So this is an appeal to authority that could discount her case if it wasn't true. Does that make sense? So those are a couple things that I notice in this account that make it likely to be true. He says, here is another example of the next most obvious question not being asked. Miss Mercer did not give the time of day when she witnessed these events, and no one from the sheriff's office nor the Warren Commission ever bothered to inquire. From her interest, we would assume the events happened before the assassination, but we don't know. Next week, we will print the record of a man who said he saw a puff of smoke come from that clump of trees. Still, the Warren Commission claims to have no evidence of a second rifleman. And then he gives a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. It says, a resolution for every day. Let the first act every morning be to make the following resolve for the day. I shall not fear anyone on earth. I shall fear only God. I shall not bear ill will toward anyone. I shall not submit to injustice from anyone. I shall conquer untruth by truth. And in resisting untruth, I shall put up with all suffering. Wow, what a wonderful, wonderful resolution for every day by Mahatma Gandhi. So there is that quote. Okay, that's always so fascinating. I love those forgive my grief passages. This one is a story that I just thought would be really fascinating. It is about a woman who was a widow of a soldier born into slavery. It says from another age. This is from People magazine, October 1998. It says from another age, and it shows her in 1922 with that husband. And then here she is at that point in history. Okay. It says, theirs was an unlikely love, and it got off to an unpromising start. On that February day in 1922, when Daisy Graham first noticed Robert Anderson at church in Forest City, Arkansas, she was 21. And though Anderson was a fine figure of a man with a soldier's erect bearing, he was 79. I saw all those white hairs, Daisy would remember years later, and I started snickering. But after she and Anderson were introduced, and she heard his stories about his life as a slave, a Civil War soldier, and a successful farmer, Daisy changed her tune. I said to myself, I don't need to be laughing at him. I need to be laughing at myself. And so after a 30-day courtship, Graham, so she was 21 and he was 79. My goodness. Graham, a teacher whose family was so poor, she said, we had no chairs. We ate standing up around the table. Married the man. Until he died in a car crash in 1930, they lived what she called an 8-year honeymoon. Daisy Anderson herself would survive another 68 years. When she died, September 19th, so that would be in 1998, just a month before this was printed, In a Denver nursing home at 97 years old, so did a link to a vanished time. The widow of a man born into slavery. She was the oldest of 3 known surviving Civil War widows. John Tyler was president when Robert Ball Anderson drew his first breath on March 1st, 1843, her husband, on a flax and hemp plantation in Greene County, Kentucky. My father, living on a neighboring plantation, was permitted to visit twice a week, so long as Mother was with us. He recounted in his poignant memoir, From Slavery to Affluence, which was dictated to Daisy after their wedding. But his mother was sold when Anderson was 6, and he never saw her again. Oh my goodness. In April 1865, rebelling against yet another flogging by his owner's wife, he fled to enlist in the Union Army's 125th Colored Infantry. The war ended before he saw action, but he skirmished against Indians out west as one of the Army's first buffalo soldiers. It says, I have traveled in almost every state in Cuba and Mexico. That's him. Wow. This is her. He says, on one of my visits south, I began to feel lonesome and wanted a companion, someone to make my hours less long. Visiting his brother, he met Daisy, one of 8 children born to a sharecropper in Tennessee. When she married Mr. Anderson, said Mary Cox, her niece, that's who she was with there in that photo at the top, he was a wealthy man. Daisy lost the 2,000-acre farm during the Depression and worked as a day laborer. In 1937, she made her way to Steamboat Springs, Colorado to join her sister, May Ella Williams. They bought land north of town where they grew berries, and May Ella opened the Rushing Water Inn while Anderson worked as a hunting guide and house cleaner. They were good, clean country people that were creative. As she grew older, she attracted attention as one of the dwindling number of Civil War widows and lectured extensively. She met President Clinton and Pope John Paul II, but Robert Anderson was the only man who ever truly captured her fancy. She said she respected and liked him, but she grew to love him and said he was quite a man. So there she is, actually shaking hands with a Confederate widow in Gettysburg. Isn't that interesting? That was a really fascinating little story about that woman. We're losing so many of those ties to the real old past. We're getting to the point now where World War II veterans are few and far between. And so, yeah, I just love hearing those old stories and thinking about the lives like that intertwine the modern era with very old history. Well, today we are at the 1940s in our book here. It says the first half of the decade was soaked in blood, and then in a blinding flash, mankind's deadliest weapons put an end to history's most terrible conflict. America emerged a superpower, and the Cold War began. Wow. Look at those. Just unloading of boats. It's fantastic. Well, here we have the GI Jive. It says, along with the Lindy Hop, jitterbugs favored the Suzaku and the Big Apple. A British soldier, opposite, on leave in 1941, admires another expression of American exuberance. It says, with hits like Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B, the Andrews sisters helped boost morale, both civilian and military. They were part of a small army of performers. Other prominent recruits were Bob Hope, Marlene Dietrich, and Lena Horne, shipped over by the USO, which is the United Service Organization, to military bases around the globe. From equatorial jungles to the Arctic Circle, U.S. soldiers were more lavishly entertained than any troops in history. And when the show was over, they got to mingle in the mess hall with the stars. GIs didn't absorb culture, they also shaped it. Lindy hopping to the big band swing of Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, and Count Basie, they infected almost every country they visited with jitterbug fever. Nor was their influence confined to music and dance. Fighting men added new terms to the national lexicon. Jeep, Snafu, R&R, the Dear John letter, plastering their footlockers with publicity shots of Rita Hayworth and Betty Grable, Lonesome Soldiers made the pinup girl, a term that debuted in 1943 in a GI newspaper, a mainstream icon. These pictures, one devotee wrote, give us guys a good idea of what we're fighting for. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? This is no drill. By 1941, war with Japan was considered inevitable. Even so, when Japanese bombers raided U.S. bases at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the December 7th attack was so unexpected that it was at first believed to be a drill. I didn't even know they were sore at us, cried one sailor. The toll was staggering. 21 ships sunk or damaged, 2,388 people killed. Nearly half the dead remain entombed inside the Arizona to this day. Oh my. I didn't realize that. That is shocking. News of the assault came via radio report, interrupting football games and concerts and moving people to declare themselves ready to fight. I want to beat them Japs with my own bare hands, said the first man to line up at a recruiting station in Norfolk, Virginia. My own grandfather was only 17 years old, and he went down to the recruiting station that next day on December 8th, and he signed up as well. So that's the story of my family. What about you? On December 8th, President Roosevelt asked Congress to vote on a declaration of war and received almost unanimous support. The lone dissenter was Montana Representative Jeanette Rankin, who had also voted against entering World War I. Roosevelt labeled December 7th a day which will live in infamy, but he vowed, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. Said Montana Senator Burton Wheeler, the only thing now is to do our best to lick the hell out of them. This shows the explosion of the USS Arizona, and then one of many goodbyes. Here is a young couple saying their goodbyes. Delivered by a Coast Guard landing craft. GIs head for the beach here, so you can see that of them. That's quite a grave vision to consider. To me, that's one of the most terrifying visions that I can imagine, would be to come from a position of relative safety to be running into enemy fire on an unknown shore. That just seems very, very brave to me and very shocking. And then this is bearing away the wounded. So you have a whole ship carrying wounded soldiers there. Turning the tide on Normandy's beaches. As the troops crossed the channel to Normandy, their officers recited the order of the day from General Dwight D. Eisenhower. You are about to embark on a great crusade, the statement read. You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Operation Overlord began before dawn on June 6, 1944. By the time D-Day was over, 132,000 Allied soldiers, American, British, and Canadian, were standing on French soil. The largest seaborne invasion in history, the Normandy landing marshaled 1,200 ships, 4,000 landing craft, and 11,600 airplanes. Paratroopers hit first. Warships and bombers pummeled enemy positions. Then the infantry swarmed onto beaches codenamed Gold, Juno, Omaha, Sword, and Utah. Thanks partly to ingenious diversionary tactics, squadrons of phony tanks, sound effects faking a battle elsewhere, the Germans were caught off guard. Only at Omaha did they put up strong resistance, raining fire on U.S. soldiers from cliff-top bunkers. 10,000 died. Some drowned by their heavy backpacks as they waded towards shore. But Hitler's fortress Europe had been breached. With Soviet forces closing in from the east, the Nazis were on the defensive. Still, it would take another year for the Great Crusade to triumph. That is a lot. If you don't know, I'm a mother of a Marine and the daughter of a Marine and the granddaughter of a soldier and Air Force captain and all sorts of things. So to me, I see a bunch of young men who were just their mama's babies, and that's a very hard thing to contemplate, that many young men. War is just ugly, isn't it? Swoonatra sets young hearts aflutter. This says a pic of Bobby Soxer's Swarm Sinatra left at a 1943 radio station. So here we have Sinatra being swarmed, and then there are Bobby Sox at the table. You can see there. Baffling, declares Newsweek in 1943. He is undersized and looks underfed, but the slightest suggestion of his smile brings squeals of agonized rapture from adolescent adorers. One psychiatrist theorized that it was the wartime absence of young men that made this stateside singer the object of so much affection. But girls know what they like. They didn't see the jug-eared 138-pound beanpole that male journalists picked on. They saw Frank Sinatra's blue eyes and the way he delivered a song, making each one of them believe he sang to her alone. They lined up overnight on sidewalks, defying city curfews to ensure a seat at his shows. They wore blue polka dot bow ties, just like Frankie's. They saved his cigar butts as holy relics. Not since the days of Rudolph Valentino has American womanhood made such abashed public love to an entertainer, noted Time. It wouldn't be the last time, though. By the 1960s, Sinatra, perhaps wistful for the hysteria that once surrounded him, complained that too few DJs were brave enough to give me an equal time in Beatle land. So he had his years, but it wouldn't last forever. At home, new opportunities and new restraints. This page here shows women welding steel plates onto tanks. And this here says Japanese Americans tagged in Hayward, California. We are a kindly, sentimental people about what women should or should not do, claimed Fortune magazine in 1943. Many thoughtful citizens are seriously disturbed over the wisdom of bringing married women into the factories. But with a workforce drained of men, America desperately needed able hands and minds. Wisdom prevailed, encouraged by a government propaganda assuring women that operating a drill press could be feminine. By 1945, when women made up 36% of civilian workers, the female labor force had grown by half in just 5 years. While wartime America suspended its stereotypes about what work suited women, prejudice against Americans of Japanese descent intensified. In 1942, President Roosevelt ordered ethnic Japanese into 10 relocation camps in the western states. Many internees were U.S. citizens. Some were veterans of World War I. Now they were prisoners, though no charge were ever brought against any of the 110,000 people who were rounded up. Property, farms, jobs, and most of all a sense of belonging were lost during the 3 years that families spent in the camps. At war's end, the interned Japanese were released to begin rebuilding their lives. The women who had proved themselves in the workforce were also sent home in order to create jobs for men returning from battle. Islands of agony. For months after Pearl Harbor, Allied forces in the Pacific suffered disaster upon disaster. The Japanese conquered Hong Kong, Singapore, and a string of islands stretching nearly to Hawaii. On Bataan and Corregidor, MacArthur's starved troops surrendered, only to die by the thousands on forced march to prison camps. But in June 1942, U.S. planes and ships won the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 of Japan's biggest aircraft carriers. It was a grueling, inch-by-inch struggle. In New Guinea's jungles, soldiers were plagued by leeches, malaria, and skin ulcers. From Saipan to Guam to Tarawa, corpses littered tropical beaches. When cornered, the Japanese launched terrifying banzai charges, suicide attacks with bayonets and clubs. At sea, kamikaze pilots used their planes as bombs. Under such conditions, one Marine recalled, the veneer of civilization wore pretty thin. If the enemies would rather die than be captured, many GIs were happy to oblige. By late 44, MacArthur had retaken the Philippines. By spring 1945, Iwo Jima and Okinawa were in American hands, but the Japanese held on to their will to fight until it was shattered by the power of the unleashed atom. This shows a concentration camp victim And here we have U.S. troops standing amidst smoking embers of a barn where 1,000 prisoners were burned alive by the German SS. Oof. Face to face with the unthinkable, Adolf Hitler had long proclaimed his intention of making Europe Jew-free. But it was only as the advancing Allied armies liberated the concentration camps scattered across Germany and Eastern Europe in 1945 that the world learned the full extent and confronted the horror of the Nazis' systematic genocide. At Dachau, Auschwitz, and dozens of other man-made hells, the smell came first. And the sight of emaciated corpses stacked like cordwood. Among the dead were living skeletons, many too weak to greet their rescuers. General George S. Patton vomited. Battle-toughened GIs wept. Some took quick revenge on captured SS guards. Others handed their pistols to freed prisoners. Sergeant Fred Friendly, later a pioneering TV news producer, wrote his mother, "Your son saw this with his own eyes and aged 10 years. More than 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jewish undesirables, leftists, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others perished in the camp's gas chambers, starved, or were worked to death. A half-century later, their shadow still haunts the world. I could never dance about my liberation," said one former prisoner. "Not then and not now. I was numb. I just couldn't put all that suffering aside." I think we're going to pause there. This section is longer than some of the others, and I think that's what my heart can take today. I bet you're feeling something similar. We will revisit the 1940s next time. Today we're going to end with something that we've alluded to earlier in the program. This is future Queen Elizabeth when she was the mother. It says, Her Majesty as mum. A mother of 2 toddlers when she took the throne and who had 2 more babies while reigning, Queen Elizabeth II famously put duty before family. That's where the criticism came in for sure, didn't it? There she is with King Charles. If they had scoured the globe, they could not have found anyone so suited to the part, said Winston Churchill of Queen Elizabeth II, who had just begun what is now the longest reign on Britain's throne. And it certainly did turn out to be. This was published in 2016. So certainly her reign was the longest in Britain. These days, some royal observers are less flattering in their assessment of the Queen as a parent. Royal responsibilities took her away from home often, and as was the custom of the time, she was not a hands-on parent. Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward were often in the care of nannies. As a young monarch determined to prove herself, Elizabeth had none of today's models for balancing work and motherhood, nor did she have a warm co-parent in Prince Philip. But as these photographs attest, when she took off the crown, Her Royal Highness could be a relaxed and doting mother, delighted to show her children to the world. So there she is with Charles. And then we have photos of her with her children. So there she is. It says with, at the top, 4-month-old Princess Anne. Princess Anne is now the workingest royal in England. Still amazing in her 70s. There's Charles. And of course, Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. Here she is with Charles. Oh my goodness, look at that darling little car right there. Wow. That's quite a childhood to have a plaything like that. There she is, it says, with taking in the 6 o'clock news. The Windsors with a corgi. You can see the little corgi there. And then you've got the Queen. And it says Philip and Andrew. And this is when she first brought Andrew to Trooping the Color. Wow. He's just laughing at her. Wow. Okay, that's what we get. young Queen Elizabeth as a young mother. I hope you enjoyed those photos, and I hope you enjoyed this Vintage Variety Hour. I know I did. I love having these with you. It brings so many different fun topics up in one time together. So let me know what you enjoyed. Let me know what stands out to you, and we'll see you next time. Also, vote about the book. Bye, y'all. Have a great day.